Let's create an executable Java application. Every application needs an entry point to begin executing the code. In Java, that location is a method called main. When the Java Virtual Machine, or JVM, executes an application, it'll look for a method called main. The signature for the main method is very specific and always the same. First comes the word public. Public means that the main method is accessible at runtime from anywhere within the Java Virtual Machine. Next comes the word static. Here, static simply means that the main method belongs to the class as a whole, and we don't need to have an instance of the class created before we can call the main method. The JVM does not create an object from the class used as the entry point to our application code. It simply starts our application running at the main method we provide, and that's only possible when the method is static and conforms to the expected method signature. Next is the keyword void. Void in this case means nothing is returned from the method to the operating system when the application terminates. In many languages, an integer is returned to the operating system, indicating that the application completed successfully. In general, a return code of 0 indicates success, while non-zero indicates a failure condition. The reason Java returns void instead of an integer is because the main method may terminate before the application does, if you're using threads in your code, so the final return code for the application may not be known when main exits. However, as we'll see in just a bit, there is a way to return a status code to the operating system when our application terminates. And finally comes the word main. The method must be called main, and it must be all lowercase. Nothing else will work. Java requires parentheses around the parameter list for a method. The parameter list for main is specified first with the word string with a capital S. String is the name of a class type in Java. It's a fundamental type and provides the means for us to manipulate string data in our application. Next is a pair of open and closing brackets, which indicate that our parameter will be an array of strings. Next, by convention, comes the word args. Args in this case is the variable name used to refer to our array of strings. The main method signature will always look this way, and nothing is optional. However, two things can be different if you wish. Rather than using left and right brackets, you can use 3 dots instead to indicate the variable argument format will be used. This format is rarely used in practice for the main method. You almost always see the bracket pair, but this might be something good to know for a certification test or during a job interview. The other thing that can be different is the parameter name args. It can be any legal Java variable name. The variable name args is used by convention, and you'll almost always see it in practice. Once again, a good certification exam question or interview question. Now that you know how to formulate the main method invocation, let's write some code. We'll be using an IDE or integrated development environment to write our code. There are 3 primary IDEs for Java on the market: Eclipse, NetBeans, and IntelliJ IDEA. I personally really like IntelliJ IDEA, so that's the one we'll be using. There's a free and a paid version of the IDE. We'll be using the free version. Before we get started, if you need to install Java or IntelliJ on your computer, you'll find links to other videos where I show you what to do down in the description. Our first application will be very simple. Let's start up IntelliJ IDEA. We're going to create a new project. If you've never used IntelliJ before, starting it up for the first time should take us to the Create Project panel. If you've used IntelliJ before, or already have it open, from the menu bar, select File, New Project, and you should end up at a screen that looks like this. Because we're in the very early stages of learning Java at this point, we'll only make minimal changes here. First, we'll give our project a name of My Project. Java is selected as the programming language, and for the build system, we'll select IntelliJ. Don't worry, we'll look at Maven and Gradle in the future, but for now, let's keep it simple. And let's uncheck Add Sample Code, as that's what we'll be writing, at least for a while. And let's click Create. IntelliJ will show our project in the project window on the left. Notice the folder icon for the source is blue. That's where we'll create our code. To do so, let's click on the source folder icon and select New, then Java Class. We're prompted to give our class a name. Let's call it My First Class. As soon as we hit Enter, IntelliJ generates the class definition and puts us in a window where we can edit the code. Once again, we see the access modifier, public, indicating our class is declared to be public and can be accessed from other classes. We're creating something called a class, which is a fundamental concept in object-oriented programming. A class serves as a blueprint for creating objects, which are instances of a class. But don't worry, we'll get to all that in a later video. And finally, our class has boundaries, specified by the curly braces. Curly braces define the beginning and end of a code block, in this case, our class. This class will be the entry point to our application, so this is where we'll add our code for the main method we saw earlier. Let's drop down a few lines and add the code. IntelliJ will indent the code, so this will make it easier to read, but it isn't required in Java. Java doesn't care about indentation. It's purely a matter of style and readability. Within the curly braces, let's write public, static, void, main, then add parentheses, and string with a capital S, open and closing brackets, and the variable name args. The closing parentheses should already be there. Just like for our class, we only need to add curly braces to indicate the boundaries, the start and end of our method. And this is a perfectly legal Java application. Notice the green arrows. Clicking these allows us to run the code. Let's click the green arrow in the area between our class code and the project window, called the gutter. The first entry in the list says, run myFirstClass.main. This notation indicates that our main method is contained within the class called myFirstClass and will be called when you select it. This dot notation will become very familiar to you as a Java programmer. Let's run the code, and when we do, we see an exit code of 0 was returned by our application. So even though main returns void, our Java application will return 0 by default. Let's see how we can change that. We're going to jump ahead a bit and show how we can use the exit method from the system class to return a different error code. The system.exit method will terminate the Java application whenever it's invoked, so we have to be careful when using it in a real application. But for our demonstration here, it won't do any harm. System is the class, and exit is the static method of that class. To invoke the static method exit, we specify the class that's located in our case system, and we use a dot to separate the class name from the method name, in our case exit. And then we pass in an argument of 2 enclosed in parentheses. The parentheses are always necessary in Java when calling a method, and a semicolon is always necessary to terminate the statement. How we're able to access the system class is a bit of magic for right now. We'll cover this in the next lesson. For now, let's run the code we just changed by clicking the green arrow, and we'll see the return code is now 2. We can use the system.exit method to return control back to the operating system and send a return code. This can come in very handy for communicating with the operating system or a script that invoked our code if something went wrong, so it can take appropriate action. So we made a big deal about public static void main and how it's the only entry point into our application. Let's see how we can create another main method with a slightly different signature and see what happens. Below the curly braces that terminate our current main method, let's add a new line and type in public static void main once again. We'll add parentheses as required, but this method will take no arguments, so we'll just have an open and closing set of parentheses. We'll add our curly braces pair, and since we now know how to use system.exit, we'll add that, but this time we'll pass in an argument of -1. We'll add a semicolon, and we're done coding. So here's the question: which main method will get invoked, and how will we know? What should happen is the method that gets invoked will terminate the program either with a 2 or -1. Let's run the code and find out. If you said 2, congratulations. Remember, we said the main method signature has to be a precise match for what the JVM is expecting as the entry point into our code. Anything different is not the main method it will execute. So why can we have 2 methods, both called main, you ask? Great question. We'll be learning why in an upcoming video on overloading. That's all for now. Thanks for watching, and remember to always begin secure.